George Foreman. How did a 45-year-old man with a belly and no speed knock out the undefeated heavyweight champ? Removed from his first reign as heavyweight champion. He'd retired in 1977 after a loss to Jimmy Young and spent 10 years away from boxing, becoming an ordained minister and gaining significant weight. When he returned to the ring in the late 80s, few took it seriously. The boxing world saw an older, slower man with a doughy frame and none of the menace he once carried. But what they missed was the part that never left: Foreman's composure, intelligence, and knockout power.
Michael Moorer was 26 in his prime and held the WBA and IBF heavyweight belts. He was coming off a career-best win over Evander Holyfield and entered the ring as a heavy favorite. He was faster, younger, and a natural southpaw, everything Foreman wasn't. Odds makers gave Foreman little chance. Many called it a mismatch. Most assumed Foreman was simply cashing one last check.
For 9 rounds, Moorer controlled the fight. He landed clean combinations, circled well, and built a clear lead on the scorecards. Foreman looked slow and flat-footed, throwing mostly single jabs and absorbing more than he gave. But the rhythm was deceptive. Foreman wasn't looking to win rounds. He was looking to find a single clean opening. He kept edging forward, pressing Moorer just enough to trap him along the ropes and narrow his exits. In round 10, the trap sprung. Foreman landed a sharp left jab that snapped Moorer's head back. Moorer didn't move. A split second later, Foreman uncorked a straight right hand that landed flush on the chin. Moorer collapsed. He tried to rise, but his body wouldn't respond. He was counted out. At 45 years old and 10 months, George Foreman became the oldest heavyweight champion in boxing history. He didn't rely on youth, speed, or volume. He won by staying calm, conserving energy, and waiting for the one moment that mattered. That punch didn't just win him a title, it rewrote what age meant in heavyweight boxing. Bernard Hopkins. Most fighters fear aging. Bernard Hopkins turned it into a weapon. In May 2011, Hopkins stepped into the ring against Jean Pascal, a 28-year-old light heavyweight champion with explosive speed and youth on his side. Their first fight had ended in a controversial draw. Hopkins had rallied late, but the early knockdowns gave Pascal just enough to escape with his belts. The rematch was a shot at history. Hopkins was 46 years old. No one his age had ever won a recognized world title. But Hopkins wasn't a typical 46-year-old. He didn't rely on reflexes or raw athleticism. He fought with angles, anticipation, and mind games. Every movement was calculated. He studied habits, dictated pace, and punished hesitation. Against Pascal, he leaned on all of that. He walked him down slowly, forcing Pascal to work harder in each round. And when Pascal tired, Hopkins pushed harder. In round 6, Hopkins did something few expected. He threw a 6-punch combination that drove Pascal into retreat. In round 7, he mimed push-ups between rounds, showing the crowd and Pascal that he was nowhere near done. Hopkins was taking over mentally, physically, and emotionally. By the later rounds, Pascal was fading. He still had flashes, but Hopkins smothered the counters and kept finding openings for short right hands and body shots. The judges saw it clearly. Hopkins won a unanimous decision and made history. The oldest man to win a major world title, breaking George Foreman's record by nearly a year. What made it remarkable was the opponent. Pascal was in his prime, holding real titles and coming off wins over Chad Dawson and Adrian Diaconu. Hopkins beat him not by outslugging him, but by showing that experience, timing, and endurance could outlast youth. Hopkins didn't view 40 as a decline. He viewed it as a sharpening. From ages 40 to 49, he fought 13 times against names like Tarver, Pavlik, Dawson, and Kovalev, and was never stopped. For most boxers, longevity is about survival. For Hopkins, it was his legacy. Manny Pacquiao. What does it take to beat an undefeated world champion at age 40? Manny Pacquiao had the answer. In July 2019, Pacquiao faced Keith Thurman for the WBA super welterweight title. Thurman was 29, unbeaten, and coming off wins against Sean Porter and Danny Garcia. He was taller, longer, and known for his aggressive style and knockout power. Pacquiao, on the other hand, was a decade past his prime, 40 years old with 70 fights on his record. Most expected a competitive showing, but few predicted a win. The first round shattered that assumption. Pacquiao dropped Thurman with a perfectly timed right hook followed by a short left straight. It wasn't a flash knockdown, it was a statement. Thurman got up, but the tone of the fight had changed. Pacquiao was dictating. Despite his age, Pacquiao's speed was still elite. He darted in and out with flurries, changing angles before Thurman could reset. He wasn't overwhelming Thurman with volume like in his younger days. Instead, he picked his moments, exploding in short bursts, then slipping out of range. Thurman had success in the middle rounds, landing clean body shots and catching Pacquiao with right hands, but he couldn't sustain pressure. Every time he built momentum, Pacquiao responded with a burst. Round 10 became the turning point. Thurman appeared to be rallying until Pacquiao landed a vicious body shot that bent him over and sent him retreating across the ring. Thurman later admitted he was close to spitting out his mouthpiece to buy time. It didn't result in a knockdown, but it sealed the fight's tone. Pacquiao was in control. The judges awarded a split decision, but the performance wasn't in doubt. At 40, Pacquiao had just beaten a prime, undefeated world champion and taken his belt. It wasn't nostalgia, it was execution. What made it remarkable wasn't that Pacquiao could still compete, it was that he could still adapt. He wasn't the same fighter he was at 25. He didn't rely on reckless aggression, he used rhythm, timing, and experience to win on the highest stage. In doing so, he became the oldest fighter ever to hold the WBA super welterweight title, and the only 8-division champion to win a belt past age 40. Vitali Klitschko. Even after turning 40, Vitali Klitschko defended his title with absolute control. When most heavyweights hit 40, they're winding down. Slower reflexes, reduced stamina, and a younger crop of challengers usually force retirement or expose the aging fighter in the ring. But Vitali Klitschko wasn't like most heavyweights. After turning 40 in July 2011, he continued to defend the WBC heavyweight title without showing any major decline. In fact, his control only became more clinical. Klitschko had already built a reputation as one of the most dominant heavyweights of the 2000s. Towering at 6'7", with a granite chin and an awkward arm-punching style, he was hard to hurt and harder to hit cleanly. His jab was a constant weapon, and he rarely allowed opponents to fight on their terms. After returning from a 4-year layoff in 2008, he recaptured the WBC title and held on to it for the rest of his career. Post-40, he fought 3 more times, all title defenses, and never lost a round convincingly. In September 2011, just 2 months after turning 40, he fought Tomasz Adamek in Poland. Adamek was a former light heavyweight and cruiserweight champion, known for his toughness and activity, but he was completely outclassed. Klitschko walked him down behind the jab, used subtle angles to avoid return fire, and eventually forced a 10th round stoppage without ever looking in danger. In 2012, he defended against Derek Chisora, a younger, aggressive British contender. The fight was messy and physical, but Klitschko controlled the tempo. He kept Chisora at range, nullified his pressure, and won a clear unanimous decision. A year later, in what would be his final bout, he faced Manuel Char. The fight ended in round 4 due to a cut, but Klitschko had already taken command. At 41, Klitschko retired as WBC heavyweight champion. He wasn't forced out by injury or defeat. He left on his own terms, with the belt still around his waist. Across those final defenses, he showed no signs of serious physical decline. His discipline, technique, and ring IQ allowed him to age without vulnerability. In the end, age didn't catch up to Vitali Klitschko. He simply walked away before it could. Tulani Sugarboy Malinga. Tulani Malinga had been overlooked his whole career, until one night at age 42 changed everything. By 1997, Malinga was seen as a seasoned veteran, never quite elite. He'd shared the ring with top names like Nigel Benn and Chris Eubank, but often came up short. Technically sharp and mentally tough, he lacked the knockout power or hype that fast-tracked other contenders. Heading into his title shot against Robin Reed, Malinga had already lost 9 times. At 42, few gave him a real chance. Reed was everything Malinga wasn't. Young, fast, undefeated, and holding the WBC super middleweight belt. He'd edged out Vincenzo Nardiello to claim the title and was expected to use Malinga as a stepping stone to bigger fights. But from the opening bell, the roles reversed. Malinga boxed with patience and precision. He wasn't chasing Reed or swinging for the fences. He relied on timing, a stiff jab, and calculated movement. Reed, known for explosive bursts and athleticism, couldn't find his range. Every time he tried to impose himself, Malinga made him miss or responded with a clean counter. As the rounds passed, Malinga grew stronger. He didn't just hold his own, he started taking the lead. His punches were more accurate, his positioning more effective, and his control of the ring more obvious. Reed never looked badly hurt, but he looked outclassed. What had been billed as a routine title defense was turning into a tactical masterclass by the older man. The decision was unanimous. Malinga walked away with the WBC belt and the respect that had eluded him for years. At 42, he became the oldest fighter to claim that version of the title, not because his opponent made a mistake, but because his strategy, composure, and skill never faltered. He went on to defend the title once before losing it to Richie Woodhall, but his win over Reed stood apart. This wasn't a dramatic comeback or a wild upset, it was a veteran executing a near-perfect plan against a younger, fresher champion who couldn't keep up. Tulani Malinga's rise didn't follow boxing's usual arc. His defining moment came when most fighters have already walked away. Cornelius K9 Bundridge. How did a 41-year-old former reality show contestant claw his way back to a world title? Cornelius K9 Bundridge first made his name on the second season of The Contender, a boxing reality series that aired in 2006. He didn't win the show, but he made an impression with his raw power, aggression, and unfiltered personality. At the time, he was already in his early 30s, older than most prospects, and few thought he'd become a legitimate world champion. But Bundridge kept grinding. In 2010, at age 37, he shocked the boxing world by knocking out Corey Spinks to win the IBF light middleweight title. He defended it twice before losing to Ishe Smith in 2013. Most assumed that would be the end. Bundridge was nearly 42, coming off a one-sided loss, and no longer backed by a major promoter. Then came the call to fight Carlos Molina, a slick, awkward champion known for frustrating opponents with his clinch-heavy defensive style. The fight was set in Molina's hometown of Cancun, Mexico. Bundridge was the underdog, fighting on the road with everything stacked against him. But he came in prepared. From the opening bell, Bundridge applied smart pressure and stayed composed. He used short, looping right hands to disrupt Molina's rhythm and never allowed him to tie up comfortably. Instead of chasing, Bundridge cut off the ring and forced Molina to work harder than usual. In the second round, he dropped him with a sharp counter right hand that shifted the momentum for good. As the rounds wore on, Bundridge maintained control. He wasn't dominating every exchange, but he was landing the cleaner, heavier shots and dictating the pace. Molina looked tentative and increasingly out of answers. After 12 rounds, the decision was clear. Bundridge had reclaimed the IBF title. At 41, he became the oldest fighter to win a 154-pound world championship. The win wasn't a fluke or a nostalgia moment. It was earned in a hostile environment against a defending champion known for shutting fighters down. For a boxer who came up through a reality show, fought for respect his entire career, and never had major backing, it was the ultimate statement. Even in his 40s, Cornelius Bundridge wasn't fading. He was still taking belts.
Glenn Johnson.
By 41, Glenn Johnson had fought everyone and was still handing out upsets. Nicknamed the Road Warrior, Johnson built his career the hard way. He was known for his durability, his volume punching, and his willingness to take fights anywhere, anytime. By the time he reached his 40s, he'd already faced Roy Jones Jr., Antonio Tarver, Chad Dawson, and Clinton Woods, sometimes winning, often losing close, controversial decisions. His record wasn't spotless, but his reputation was solid. He was never an easy fight. In 2010, at age 41, Johnson got a surprise opportunity. He was invited to join Showtime's Super 6 World Boxing Classic, a high-stakes tournament designed to unify the super middleweight division. Johnson had spent most of his career at light heavyweight, so he had to drop down in weight to compete. Many thought that at his age, the cut would drain him. Others assumed he was there as a respectable name to fill the bracket. He was matched against Alan Green, a younger, taller, faster fighter with knockout power. On paper, Green had every physical advantage, but Johnson had the experience. From the start, he pressured Green behind a tight guard, walking him down and chipping away with short hooks and body shots. Green landed clean counters but couldn't keep Johnson off him. By the 8th round, Johnson's steady pace had taken its toll. He closed the distance and landed a perfectly timed right hand that sent Green collapsing into the ropes. The referee didn't bother counting. It was over. Johnson had scored a knockout in a major tournament at age 41 on short notice, in a division he hadn't fought in for over a decade. It wasn't a world title fight, but it wasn't far off. The Super 6 was filled with champions and elite contenders. Johnson's win over Green advanced him to the semifinal, where he would go on to lose a competitive fight against Carl Froch. But even in that loss, he pushed Froch harder than most expected. Johnson's career was never about belts. It was about showing up and competing at the highest level, no matter the odds. At 41, he was still doing that. And sometimes, he was still winning.